The knock wasn't a knock, it was panic fists, hammering my door as pipes burst down the street, and the wind screamed like it wanted inside. I opened the inner door and kept the storm door locked. Outside, neighbors shivered in blankets, breath exploding, white eyes fixed on my house, the only one still warm. The HOA president shoved to the front, hair whipped wild by the blizzard. "You shut it off," she yelled. "Open the access now. This is an emergency." I didn't raise my voice. I looked past her at the darkened houses, lights dying one by one, ceilings sagging under ice. I remembered the day her crew crossed my fence and welded my heating line shut for safety. No warning, no permission. "I warned the board," I said. "You ignored it." She stepped closer, fear cracking through her anger. "People are freezing." I turned toward my fence line, snow biting my face, and stopped at a small metal box, half buried in ice, sitting squarely inside my fence on my deed. "Then, listen carefully," I said, fitting the key. "Because this isn't me turning something off, it's me taking back what was never yours." The HOA president didn't introduce herself with a conversation. She introduced herself with an order. Her name was Claire Wells, and she showed up 2 days after the fuel truck left my driveway, standing at my fence with a contractor in a reflective jacket and the HOA property manager glued to her clipboard. No knock, no notice, just boots on snow and authority already assumed. "We're executing an emergency safety correction," Claire said, pointing past my fence line. "Your auxiliary heating line is a community risk." I told her to stop. Everything beyond that fence was private property. She didn't argue. She smiled, controlled, confident, practiced, the smile of someone who believed procedure outweighed ownership. "HOA bylaws allow temporary action when a homeowner creates a hazard," she said. "This won't take long." That was Claire Wells in full. She wasn't loud or sloppy. She was surgical. Every move wrapped in language like compliance, temporary for safety, control disguised as responsibility. Before I could call the county, her contractor climbed over my fence. Sparks snapped in the cold. Metal hissed. And right in front of me, they welded my heating line shut. "For safety," Claire said evenly, "pending board review." I told her the system was fully permitted, inspected, legal. She wrote on her clipboard without looking up. "You're welcome to appeal after winter," she said. "But uniform standards come first." Then Claire Wells turned and walked away, absolutely certain I'd freeze before spring and come begging long before that. The first notice arrived before noon, taped crookedly to my gate like a warning label slapped onto meat. Emergency safety violation. No signature, no phone number. Just a deadline, immediate compliance required, and a threat of daily fines if I didn't remove unauthorized infrastructure. I tore it down and walked the fence line. Snow squeaked under my boots. The weld they'd laid the day before was still warm enough to smell burnt metal, sharp and sour. My heating system hadn't failed on its own. It had been silenced. I photographed the seam, the slag, the tool marks, time-stamped, geotagged, the habit stuck from years of documenting things that could kill you if ignored. By mid-afternoon, an email followed. Same language, same urgency, different sender, the HOA management company, this time copying the board. For community safety, temporary measure, pending review. Words chosen to sound calm while doing violence to reality. I replied once. Short, clinical, permits attached, inspection reports attached. A single sentence at the end. "No one has consent to enter my property. Any further intrusion will be documented." No response. That evening, the HOA president drove past twice. Slow, deliberate, headlights sweeping my fence like a searchlight. She didn't stop, she didn't need to. The message was already delivered. We can reach you whenever we want. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees overnight. The next morning, the letters multiplied. A formal notice slid under my door demanding removal within 30 days, followed by a schedule of escalating penalties, numbers big enough to threaten a lien. Another email warned that continued non-compliance may result in enforcement action. Still no mention of the weld, still no acknowledgement of trespass. I called the county, left a message, called utilities, left another. The storm system building over the mountains was already on every forecast, red and pulsing like a bruise. Wind advisories. Sub-zero wind chills, the kind of cold that doesn't negotiate. By noon, a safety inspection was scheduled. No date, no time, just a statement that access would be required. I answered in writing, "Denied. Private property. Provide a warrant or a court order." The reply came from the HOA president herself. One line, "Refusal noted." That afternoon, a neighbor knocked. He stood there awkwardly, hands buried in his coat sleeves. "They told us not to do anything on our own," he said. "Generators, heaters, said the HOA would handle emergencies centrally. I looked past him at the street, identical houses, identical assumptions, a single aging system feeding all of it. They tell you why I asked. He shook his head. Just uniformity. That word again. By evening, another truck rolled into the neighborhood, not to my house, but to the clubhouse. Fuel delivery. I watched from my porch as the HOA president supervised, pointing, directing, making sure her building stayed ready. My system sat dead behind my fence, welded shut temporarily, while the association stockpiled for itself. That's when the shape of it finally came into focus. This wasn't about safety. It was about control, making sure no one opted out of dependence. The pressure drop came first. The furnace hesitated, then kicked back on, then hesitated again. I checked the gauges normal, too normal. I followed the line with a flashlight breath fogging in the beam. The weld held firm. No leaks, no cracks. The problem wasn't failure. It was restriction. At 2:41 a.m., the heat cut out completely. I didn't swear. I didn't shout. I moved. Boots, coat, headlamp. The wind hit like a slap-stealing breath instantly. I traced the line again, slower this time, until I saw it the valve housing near the fence had been adjusted just enough to choke flow without triggering alarms. A subtle hand, a practiced one. I knelt in the snow and photographed everything. Footprints crossed my yard, half filled by drifting powder. They led back toward the street, toward the houses that still glowed faintly with warmth. Inside, I pulled the security footage. Infrared showed a figure at my fence hours earlier, steady, unhurried. No hood, no rush. The posture of someone who believed they were allowed. I saved the clip, backed it up, and attached it to a single email addressed to the entire board, management included. Subject: unauthorized entry and sabotage, body evidence attached. Investigation requested. The reply didn't come from the board. It came from the HOA president. The footage is inconclusive, she wrote. Weather and shadows make identification impossible. Your system remains non-compliant. That was the moment the conflict crossed its final line. She wasn't denying the act. She was denying me my property, my preparation, my right to exist outside her system. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the fence she'd crossed. Somewhere down the block, a pipe burst with a sound like a gunshot. I stood in my darkened house and felt the cold settle in, heavy and patient. And for the first time since this started, I stopped asking how to make it end and started deciding when. By dawn, the neighborhood sounded different. Not louder, hollower. Engines coughed and failed. A garage door groaned, then stopped halfway. Someone tried to thaw a pipe with a hairdryer. The breaker snapped with a sharp pop. The cold wasn't just winning, it was taking inventory. I documented everything once more. The adjusted valve position, the footprints, the weld bead on my line. I printed the deed map and highlighted the fence line in red, then the valve enclosure inside it. The facts stacked neatly. The intent did not. At 9:12 a.m., a neighborhood alert went out. Potential heating disruptions due to severe weather. Residents are advised to rely on HOA-coordinated emergency resources. Individual systems are discouraged. Discouraged. That word finally said the quiet part out loud. I stepped outside to clear snow from my fence line and found fresh tracks again, new, this time leading to the valve housing. They hadn't broken anything. They hadn't needed to. The choke was enough. It always had been. I added the photos to the folder and closed the laptop. The county returned my call just after noon. A utilities field investigator said she could swing by to assess public safety risk, not to compel access. The distinction mattered. I told her I'd be here. She arrived an hour later, chains rattling on a city SUV. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. I walked her to the fence, showed her the weld, the valve, the deed overlay. She listened without interrupting eyes, moving between paper and metal, breath steady in the cold. Any easement? She asked. No, I said. Expired during construction. Never renewed. She nodded, and consent for entry denied. In writing, multiple times. She took photos, measured, noted the weld quality. The adjusted valve position. Then she said the sentence that shifted the weight of everything. This citation number they're using, do you know where it comes from? I couldn't find it. That's because it doesn't exist. She didn't say fraud. She didn't have to. Her partner housing compliance checked the clubhouse records next. The HOA's emergency plan listed centralized control as a best practice. No contingency for individual failure. No allowance for independent systems. A plan built on obedience, not resilience. We're opening a separate inquiry, the investigator said quietly. Off the record, you're within your rights to secure your property. Just Try to mitigate harm. I thought of the heaters I'd set aside, the extension cords coiled by the door, the thermoses lined up on the counter. I said. They left with copies of everything. The storm arrived early. It didn't announce itself. It swallowed the street. Snow came sideways, then straight down, thick enough to erase edges. Wind chill plunged, the kind of cold that punishes hesitation. At 1:47 p.m., I walked to the side yard. The valve enclosure was half buried, now a metal square breathing frost. I brushed it clear, unlocked the lid, and stared at the wheel for a long second. I didn't touch it yet. At 1:03 a.m., my phone rang. The HOA president this time, no email, no form. "We need access," she said, voice smooth but tight. "Now, the whole section is losing pressure." "You welded my line shut," I said. "That was temporary. You adjusted the valve after." A pause, just long enough. "Open it," she said. "This is bigger than you." I looked past my fence down a street already dimming as backup systems failed. Somewhere glass shattered. A ceiling gave way with a wet crash. "I warned the board," I said. "You chose control." Another pause, shorter now, sharper. "If you don't comply," she said, "we'll pursue emergency authority." I ended the call. At 1:11 a.m., I turned the wheel 1/4 turn, then another until the resistance eased and downstream pressure began to bleed off. I locked the enclosure, snapped time-stamped photos, and walked back inside without hurrying. The countdown started immediately. At 1:236 a.m., the first porch light went out. At 1:258, two more. At 1:14, the clubhouse glow flickered and died, taking the last illusion of coordination with it. At 1:27, the pounding hit my door harder than before, desperate this time. I opened the inner door and kept the storm door locked. The HOA president stood there, hair wild, parka, dusted white breath, coming fast. Behind her, neighbors clustered in blankets, eyes wide, hands shaking. "You did this," she said. I looked past her at the street I'd tried to prepare, at the houses she'd told not to. "This is an emergency," she said. I turned toward my fence, toward the small metal box sitting squarely on my deed, and felt the storm press in like a held breath. "Then, listen carefully," I said, "because the next thing that happened wouldn't just decide who had heat, it would decide who still had authority when morning came." By the time dawn pushed a thin gray line over the rooftops, half the street had gathered in front of my house. Not by plan, by necessity. Breath hung thick, boots stamped. Someone cried quietly into a sleeve. The wind had dropped, but the cold stayed settled and absolute. The HOA president stood at the center like a general who'd lost her map. Her voice cut through the murmurs. "This homeowner deliberately interfered with community infrastructure," she said, pointing at my fence. "He's holding heat hostage." I didn't interrupt. I stepped onto the porch and waited. A city SUV rolled up behind the crowd chains rattling. Then another. Doors opened. County utilities and housing compliance stepped out together. No sirens. No rush. The kind of arrival that meant decisions had already been made. The HOA president pivoted instantly. "Thank God," she said. "We need emergency access, authorized. Right now." The investigator raised a hand. "We're here to observe." The crowd went quiet. I walked to the fence line and stopped beside the valve enclosure, still locked, still rimmed with ice. "They welded my heating line shut," I said. "They adjusted this valve after." I reported it. I was ignored. "That's not the HOA president started." "Hold," the investigator said. I handed over the folder. Deed map first. Red line clear. Fence line unmistakable. Then the photos: weld bead slag, fresh tool marks, time stamps, geotags. Then the footage: infrared, steady hands at my fence, no hurry, no fear. The investigator didn't comment. She just turned the screen so the HOA board members, now clustered behind their president, could see. "That citation number you used," she said, "evenly doesn't exist." A murmur rippled. Someone swore under their breath. "And this valve," she continued, pointing, "is on private property. No easement, no override." The housing official added, "We also reviewed your emergency plan. It discourages independent preparation, centralized control only." Silence thickened. Faces shifted from accusation to calculation. The HOA president tried once more. "We acted for safety." The investigator looked at the weld. "Safety doesn't involve trespass. I spoke once. I warned you." No one argued. The HOA president's posture changed first. Shoulders tight, jaw working. "This is being taken out of context," she said. "I authorized a temporary measure." The investigator nodded. "You authorized vandalism. A beat." Pending further review, the investigator said the HOA's enforcement powers are suspended, effective immediately. She looked at the board. You'll receive written notice today. The president opened her mouth. Nothing came out, and the housing official added, "We're referring this for further action." That did it. Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. If people stop listening, there's chaos." Around her neighbors shifted, not toward her, but away. Someone shook their head. Someone else said quietly, "You told us not to prepare." I walked to the enclosure, brushed off the ice, and unlocked it. The crowd held its breath. "I didn't do this to punish anyone," I said. "I did it because control isn't the same as safety." I turned the wheel, slow, deliberate, until pressure began to return. A hiss, faint but unmistakable. Relief moved through the crowd like heat itself. Shoulders dropped. Someone laughed, then covered their mouth. A gloved hand wiped tears. Behind me, the HOA president stared at the ground authority gone, replaced by the sound of pipes beginning to thaw. The investigator closed her notebook. "This is done." As the crowd began to disperse, the sun finally broke through the cloud, cover pale and cold. And for the first time since winter, set in the neighborhood felt warmer, not because the heat was back, but because the truth was, the street didn't erupt in cheers. It exhaled. People loosened scarves, rubbed their hands together, leaned into one another like they'd been bracing against the same wind for months without realizing it. A man I barely knew nodded at me once, hard. An older woman stepped forward and pressed a thermos into my hands without a word. Someone laughed short and shaky, then apologized for laughing. The sound of heat returning crept in quietly, furnaces kicking on, pipes ticking as they warmed a low hum, replacing the brittle silence. The HOA president stayed where she was, eyes fixed on the snow at her feet, while neighbors drifted away from her orbit and back toward their homes. A few stopped to thank me. A few didn't say anything at all, just met my eyes and looked relieved. That was enough. I stood by my fence watching breath fade back into the air, and felt the pressure I'd been carrying finally start to lift. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the steadying sense that the cold had stopped advancing. A county official read from her phone on speaker right there in the street, voice flat and procedural. The HOA's enforcement authority was suspended pending review. All fines issued related to emergency safety compliance were voided. Any further action by the board required third-party oversight and written homeowner consent. An audit would begin immediately. The words landed cleanly, one after another, without drama. The HOA president didn't argue this time. She didn't look up. A board member asked about liability. The answer came back just as clean. Unauthorized entry, fabricated citation, vandalism of private infrastructure. The official paused, then added the protection change that mattered most. No reclassification or control of private systems without a recorded easement, an independent safety report, and a community vote. The phone went silent. People listened, some recorded. I leaned against the porch rail and let the cold bite my knuckles, grounding myself. Justice didn't sound like a gavel. It sounded like rules being put back where they belonged. When the calls ended, no one rushed me. I stayed where I was beside the small metal box inside my fence, snow crusted along its edges. A neighbor asked if I was okay. I nodded. Another asked if I needed help clearing the drift. I shook my head and knelt anyway, brushing ice away with my glove. I opened the lid and checked the lock intact. The wheel was warm now. I closed the box and stood looking down the street as life crept back into motion, a garage door lifting a light flicking on a child's voice calling from inside a house. I hadn't changed the weather. I'd changed a boundary. People gathered their things and went home. The HOA president walked past without speaking, smaller somehow, like authority had been something she'd been wearing. I stayed until the last engine turned over and the last porch light steadied, then went inside my house, the same house I'd prepared, the same house they'd tried to silence, and shut the door against the cold. Winter didn't teach this neighborhood to obey. It taught us where control ends and preparedness begins.